I came out of surgery, the first thing I noticed wasn't the pain. It was the quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that tells you nobody came. The recovery nurse, a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, saw me scanning the room. She adjusted my blanket without making eye contact, which is how medical staff tell you something they don't want to say out loud. I asked anyway, my family. She said they'd called the front desk. They'd been updated that the surgery went well. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. I'm 31. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, where I spend my days making sure buildings don't fall on people. I'm precise by training and cautious by nature. I don't make decisions without data. So when they told me what happened, that the driver ran the light and hit the passenger side, that I'd been in emergency surgery for 4 hours, that I'd lost enough blood to qualify the night as genuinely close, I filed it away calmly. Bodies can be rebuilt. What broke something deeper was the call log on my phone when they gave it back. My mother, 1 call, 11 minutes after the hospital had reached her. My younger brother, 2 texts. The first said, "Is it bad?" The second, sent 40 minutes later, said, "Mom says you're stable, so we're still going. Let us know when you're out." My stepfather hadn't called at all. The cruise. A 7-day Royal Caribbean sailing out of Miami, paid for partly with money I'd transferred to my mother 4 months earlier because she said the heating unit in the house had died. She'd sent me a receipt for a repair I later found out cost $800. The cruise package was $3,200 per person. 3 people went. I did the math in the hospital bed with nothing else to do. My brother's name is Theo. He's 26, the kind of handsome that makes people forgive him for things they'd never forgive anyone else. He doesn't have a steady job, which my mother describes as figuring himself out, the way you say it when you love someone enough to reclassify their patterns as phases. He surfs when he can afford to travel, which is always, because I was the one affording it. My stepfather is the kind of man who communicates primarily in sighs and strategic silence. He never asks me directly for money. He tells my mother, and my mother tells me. And by the time it reaches me, it's been wrapped in enough family mythology that refusing feels like a character flaw. My name is June. I know. It started small, the way these things always do. My mother's car needed a brake job, $400 just until she got paid. Then it was Theo's security deposit on an apartment he lasted 7 months in. Then my stepfather's medical copays, which ballooned after his knee surgery and kept ballooning in ways I never fully understood because the bills went to their house, not mine. Over 4 years, I transferred $87,000. I have the receipts. I kept them in a folder on my laptop I labeled loans because calling it that felt less like bleeding. I was driving home from a site inspection when the truck hit me. I remember the light being green. I remember the sound of my own window shattering inward. After that, nothing until the recovery room ceiling, which is hospital beige, the color of institutional indifference. The nurse told me I had a hairline fracture in my hip, 2 broken ribs, a lacerated spleen that required surgical repair, and a moderate concussion. She said I was lucky. I told her I'd heard that before and didn't love the word. She smiled a little. Her name tag said Portia. They moved me to a room on the 4th floor the next afternoon. I had a window that faced the parking garage. It wasn't scenic, but the light moved across the wall in the afternoon in a way that gave me something to watch. Portia came by at shift change. "Any visitors today?" she asked, which I understood was her way of checking without asking directly. "No," I said. She handed me my water cup without commenting. That's the thing about good nurses. They know when the kindest thing is to just refill the cup. On the second evening, my phone buzzed with a series of texts from my mother. A photo of the ocean at sunset. "Thinking of you," with a sun emoji. Then doctor said, "You're okay, so we didn't want to cancel on Theo. This trip means so much to him." Then, 3 minutes later, "You understand, right? You always understand." I set the phone face down on the blanket and looked at the parking garage for a long time. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that someone had been asking about me at the nurses' station since the night I came in. Portia told me on day 3 the way you tell someone something when you've been deciding whether to. She came in to check my drain and said casually, like it wasn't the most startling thing anyone had said to me all week, "You have someone who keeps coming by." I thought she meant my coworker, who had texted that she'd try to visit. "Not a coworker," Portia said. She described him, Tall, maybe late 50s, gray at the temples, quiet in the way that's deliberate rather than shy. He'd come the first night and stood at the nurse's station and asked which room I was in. When they told him it was family only for the first 24 hours, he hadn't argued. He'd sat in the waiting area down the hall for 2 hours and then left. He came back the next night. And the next. He never pushed to be let in. He never made demands. He just showed up, checked in, and stayed for a while in the hall before leaving. Portia said he brought coffee for the night nurses once, which she mentioned in the tone that implied it had bought him some goodwill. "Who is he?" I asked. She handed me a sticky note with a name written on it, because she's pragmatic like that. The name was Warren Holt. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in almost 15 years, but I knew it the way you know something your body memorized, before your brain had the language for it. My mother used to say it like a warning. Don't ask about Warren. When I was 12 and found a photo of a man holding me as a baby, she took it from my hands and said his name the same way she'd say that's not for you, and that was the end of it. Every time I tried to circle back, and I did try, through high school, through college, through one careful conversation when I was 23 and thought maybe she was finally ready, she shut it down. He made his choices. He's not part of this family. You have a stepfather. What I had was a stepfather who communicated in strategic silence and had never once in 20 years called me kiddo or honey, or any of the small words that mean you're mine and I'm glad. Warren Holt, in the hallway outside my hospital room, every night. I asked Portia to let him in the next time he came. He appeared in my doorway that evening around 9 o'clock. He was taller than I'd pictured from the photo. Or maybe people just seem larger when they're really there. He wore a gray jacket. He stopped just inside the threshold like he was waiting for permission to take up space. I looked at him. He looked at me. "You're awake," he said. His voice was careful, like he'd been practicing the first sentence, and that was as far as he'd gotten. "I've been awake," I said. "Who told you I was here?" He came a step closer. "Your coworker posted something on the company intranet. Someone forwarded it." He paused. "I had a Google alert." "For me?" He looked at the window. "For your name." "Yes." I didn't know what to do with that, so I didn't do anything. I just looked at him. "Why?" I asked. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down without asking, which I found oddly reassuring. He put his hands on his knees and said, "Because I've been following your career since you graduated. I've been waiting for you to want to know who I am." The monitor beeped twice. My ribs hurt when I breathed deep, so I breathed shallow instead. "You paid my hospital bill," I said, because Portia had told me that morning. The accounts office had flagged it, a full payment, out of pocket, no insurance, processed the day before. Anonymous, technically, but Portia had a good memory for faces and she'd put it together. He didn't deny it, he just nodded once like it was the obvious thing. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "I don't even know you." He looked at me then, and his face did something complicated that I didn't have a name for. "That's my fault," he said quietly. "Not yours." My mother arrived on day 5. She came through the door like she owned the building, which is her baseline setting. Her skin was sun-dark, her hair freshly blown out, her rolling carry-on still tagged with the airline sticker from the return flight. She looked, I have to say it, great. Rested. Refreshed, the particular glow of someone who has had 7 days of poolside cocktails and unlimited buffet breakfasts. "There you are," she said with the warmth of someone who'd been looking for me, though she'd had a GPS on my location for 5 days and had chosen not to come. She set her purse on the visitor chair, which was still warm from where Warren had sat the night before, and looked around the room like she was assessing property. Then she noticed the name on the dry erase board where nurses write the attending physician and any notes. Warren had asked Portia to write nothing personal there, but there was a small sticky note on the side of my water pitcher from the night before that I hadn't thrown away. Just his initials, WH, and a question mark. His way of asking if I needed anything before he left. My mother pointed at it. "What's that?" I said it was a note from a friend. Her eyes went still in the way that means she's calculating. "What friend?" I was going to answer carefully, I had planned to, but then she picked up the sticky note without asking, and I watched her face do what my hospital room had been too quiet to do for 5 days. It broke open. "Where did you get this?" Her voice went strange and flat. "He's been coming every night," I said. While you were in the Bahamas? The Caribbean, she corrected automatically, which told me her brain had separated into two tracks, one running damage control and one still on vacation. While you were on the cruise, I said. He came every night. She set the note down and turned to face me with the particular expression she uses when she's decided something is my fault. Rowan, she stopped. Remembered my name wasn't Rowan. She did that sometimes, mixed names, especially under pressure. June. He is not someone you should be talking to. He paid my hospital bill. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. That doesn't mean. It was $40,000, Mom. I'd looked it up that morning. The surgery, the ICU, 4 nights in a monitored room. My insurance would cover most of it, eventually after the deductible, after the appeals, after months of back and forth. Warren had paid the full amount, up front, no questions. He paid it before he'd even been allowed into my room. Her jaw tightened. He wants something. He wanted me to not wake up to a bill. You don't know him. I know that he was here, I said, every night. And my voice came out steadier than I expected because I'd had 5 nights of quiet and an empty chair to prepare it. I know that you weren't. She sat down then. Not in the chair. She couldn't reach the chair without stepping past something invisible. So she sat on the edge of my bed, which I didn't invite her to do, but didn't stop. Her eyes went to the window. Outside, the parking garage. The same view I'd been looking at for days. It's complicated, she said. Tell me. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she was going to do what she'd always done, change the subject, redirect, suddenly remember something that needed handling in another room. But instead, she looked at her hands, and then she said it. He's your father. I already knew. I think I'd known since I was 12 and she took the photo from my hands. I'd known in the way your body knows things before your mind gives up on hoping they're not true. You told me he chose to leave. He did. Did he? She looked up. Her eyes were doing something I hadn't seen them do in years. They were uncertain. Not calculating, not managing. Just uncertain. It's more complicated than that. Then uncomplicated. I've got time. I'm literally not going anywhere. She told me then in pieces, the way people tell you hard things when they've been holding them so long they're not sure of the shape anymore. They'd met young. They'd married young. It hadn't worked. And the way it hadn't worked was messy and mutual and involved choices she wasn't proud of. When they separated, I was 2. The custody arrangement broke down. She said he became difficult. She said she made it difficult. She used the passive voice throughout, the way you do when you know the subject of the sentence is yourself. He'd tried, she said eventually. For years. She'd made it hard. And then she'd met my stepfather and it became easier to let the story settle into something cleaner. He made his choices. He walked away. Simple. Except Warren Holt had had a Google alert for my name since I was 18. You let me think he didn't want me, I said. She didn't answer. Which was an answer. Theo arrived 20 minutes later, still in the linen shirt he'd probably worn on the last beach day, visibly unsunburned in the way that implied he'd taken the SPF seriously while I'd had surgery. He came in with the energy of someone who expected to be told everything was fine and to be on his way in under an hour. He stopped when he saw her mother's face. What happened? Nothing, she said, standing up. She knows about Warren Holt, I said. Theo's expression shifted, not guilty exactly, more like braced, which told me he already knew, had maybe always known. He was 4 years younger, but he'd grown up in the same house with the same mother, who talked when she was stressed and my stepfather wasn't around. June. Ons. How long have you known? He looked at our mother. She looked at the window. A while, he said. The monitoring machine beeped and Portia appeared at the door, with the impeccable timing of someone who'd been listening for exactly this register of silence. She assessed the room in one glance. Patient needs to rest, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. My mother gathered her purse. She paused by the bed, and I thought she might say something real, something that would start to fill the space between what was true and what she told me. Instead, she squeezed my hand once, the way you do when the words aren't there, and walked out. Theo followed. At the door he turned back. I should have told you, he said. And then, because he is who he is, he added, don't be mad at me. I looked at him for a long moment. I'll let you know, I said. Warren came that night at his usual time, around 9. He stopped in the doorway and read my face, the way people read a room before they commit to entering it. She came, he said. She came. He came to the chair and sat down. He didn't ask what she'd said or what I'd decided or what I needed from him. He just sat, and the silence between us was a different kind than the one I'd had all week. That one had been empty. This one had weight. After a while I said, "She told me." He nodded. "You've had a Google alert for my name since I was 18. A pause. 17, he said quietly. I said it when you started high school. Something moved in my chest that I didn't have a name for. Why didn't you just reach out? He looked at his hands. I did. Twice. When you turned 18. When you turned 21. He paused. Your mother told you I didn't want contact. I assumed you'd gotten the messages and agreed. I stared at him. I never got any messages. The room was very still. I know that now, he said. My mother called the next morning. She didn't apologize. Not exactly, but she asked how I was feeling, which for her is as close as it gets. Then she said, in a rush, that she needed to discuss the home equity situation with me because the rate was adjusting, and she and my stepfather had been counting on me to help bridge the gap. I let her finish. Then I said, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. She went quiet. Any of it, I said. The transfers, the bridging, the gaps. I had my laptop open on my tray table. I'd spent that morning going through 4 years of bank records, something I'd been avoiding doing the way you avoid stepping on a scale when you already know the number. I've transferred you $87,000 in 4 years, Mom. I've paid Theo's rent 3 times. I covered the knee surgery out of pocket before insurance reimbursed you, and you never sent me the reimbursement. That's not. I have the records. She was quiet again. I'm 31 years old, I said. I have a fractured hip and 2 broken ribs, and I woke up from surgery alone. I'm done being the person you call when there's a gap. After everything I've done for you. I know what you've done for me. I also know what you kept from me. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. I know he tried to reach me. I know you stopped it. That's not something we're going to fix on this phone call. But I needed you to know that I know. She made a sound that was either crying or about to be crying, and under other circumstances I would have softened immediately, because that's what I was trained to do. But I was in a hospital bed looking at a parking garage, and something had broken loose in me in a direction it had never gone before. I need to rest, I said. I'll call you when I'm ready. I hung up before she could respond. Then I sat there shaking. Not from doubt, but from the effort of it, the same way your hands shake after you lift something very heavy and set it down. Portia came in 20 minutes later with my lunch tray and took one look at me. How are we doing? I just had the most honest phone call of my life, I said, and I feel like I might need to lie down. She gestured at the bed. You're already lying down. Right. She set the tray down. Eat something. And then, matter-of-factly, he called to check on you this morning, the man who visits. What did you tell him? That you were awake and feisty? She straightened my blanket. He said that was good. I went home 12 days after the accident, on my own timeline, not my mother's. Warren drove me because my car was totaled and I hadn't asked anyone else. He didn't fill the drive with reassurances or plans. He just drove. I'd had, by then, 4 real conversations with him. Not the careful ones, not the loaded ones. Actual conversations where he told me he was a civil engineer, which explained things, and that he'd never remarried, which also explained things, and that he'd been at my college graduation because he'd found out what school I was attending and bought a ticket to the public ceremony and stood in the back. I hadn't known, but I'd had this feeling that day, strange and warm, like being watched in a good way. I'd told my mother about it and she'd said it was just graduation nerves. I thought about that in the car and didn't say it out loud. He pulled up to my building and turned off the engine, and neither of us moved for a second. You don't have to figure out what this is, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want you to think no one came. I looked at the dashboard. Outside, Columbus in October, the trees going orange and red and that specific yellow that means it's almost over. She trained me to feel guilty, I said, about wanting you, about even being curious. I paused. I know that's not your fault. It's mine to live with, he said. It's both of ours, I said, but we can figure it out. If you want to. He was quiet. Then, yeah, I want to. I nodded and opened the door, and he helped me with my bag without making it feel like help. At the entrance, he stopped because my building's lobby doors were the kind that required a fob. This is good, I said. I've got it from here. He handed me my bag. He looked at me the way I imagined he'd look through the glass all those nights, like he was memorizing something. Take care of yourself, June, he said. For real this time. I thought about my mother's voice asking what I could do when I got out. I thought about my stepfather's strategic silence. I thought about Theo's text, "We're still going," sent while I was in recovery. Then I thought about a man who'd sat in a hospital hallway for 12 nights because he didn't want me to be alone. I will, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I actually meant it. I used to think the hardest part of what happened was the accident. The broken ribs, the fractured hip, waking up alone with a mouth that tasted like metal, and a room that confirmed what I'd been quietly suspecting for years. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing I'd spent a decade making myself smaller and more useful so that people who were supposed to love me unconditionally would choose to stay. And they still left. They just did it for a cruise. There's a kind of cause and effects that doesn't show up in spreadsheets, even though I kept careful ones. For every transfer I made, every gap I bridged, every time I said yes when I meant I can't afford this, I was teaching the people around me that I didn't have limits. That I was a resource, not a person. That's not a character flaw I was born with. It was a habit I was trained into, slowly, over years, with enough praise wrapped around the ask that I stopped noticing the pattern. You're so strong, June. You always figure it out. You're the responsible one. Those sentences sound like compliments. They work like chains. What I've had to sit with, really sit with, in the quiet of a hospital room with nothing but a parking garage view and time, is that I allowed it. Not because I was foolish, but because I hadn't yet developed the kind of self-knowledge that lets you see a system you're inside of. That takes something Warren said to me once. You have to care about your own continuity. He didn't mean it selfishly. He meant that a person who runs themselves down to nothing has nothing left to give anyone, including themselves. I didn't understand that at 25 or 27 or even at 30. I understood it lying in a hospital bed at 31, with 2 broken ribs and an $87,000 spreadsheet open on my laptop. The clarity that came after wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment of righteous anger, though there was some of that too, particularly when my mother corrected me about which ocean she'd been relaxing beside while I was in surgery. It was more like a slow adjustment, the way a building settles after you correct a foundational issue. I started seeing things as they were rather than as I needed them to be. My brother wasn't figuring himself out. My stepfather wasn't quietly grateful. My mother wasn't protecting me from Warren. She was protecting a version of the story that kept her comfortable. And Warren, a man I didn't know, a man I'd been taught to not want to know, had driven to a hospital, sat in a waiting room, and come back every night for nearly 2 weeks without asking for anything in return. Not forgiveness, not relationship, not even acknowledgement. Just presence. Just the refusal to let me disappear alone. That's what I want to remember when I think about what this cost me and what it gave back. The $87,000 is gone. I'm not recovering it. What I'm recovering is the understanding that integrity isn't just about what you do for other people. It's about what you refuse to do to yourself. That real intelligence, the kind that actually protects you, means being willing to look at a painful truth without flinching and say, this is what's real, and I'm going to act accordingly. And that the strength I was praised for, all those years of being the reliable one, the fixer, the backup battery, that strength was real. I just had to stop lending it to people who were draining it and start using it for the life I actually wanted. I'm still figuring out what that life looks like. Warren and I are taking it slowly, which is the right speed. My mother and I are not speaking, which is the right distance for now. My ribs are healing. The hip takes longer. Most things do.